always something we've had for generations. But the first two, these two over here on the left, really have only come about, I would say, in the last probably 10 to 15 years. Screen time, since 1950s when the television was invented, but for the most part, you'll see a lot of discussion around these things. So we'll start with social media. And it's interesting because when you look at who we follow in general, right, it kind of makes, oh, there we go, hello there, Tweety Bird. It's interesting to see who we follow in society and what that represents about us, right? So whether you're, it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is, if you just look at like Paul Ryan or Michelle Obama, look at how many followers they have. And whether or not you have different religious affiliations, look at the following counts there. What's amazing is I could add all of these up and they won't even equal this person right here. I don't know who she is, but apparently she's got a lot of followers, right? And so it's kind of interesting to see who we follow, right? What's important to us on these social platforms. Now, here's a quiz for you, and I'll be surprised if someone gets it right, because you may think of something, but it's not what you're thinking. The top 5 social media apps among US teens, the top 5 apps that they've ever accessed. It doesn't mean the ones they're on all the time, but the top 5 social media apps. This is of May of this last year. What do you think number 1 is? It's not Snapchat. It's not Instagram. YouTube. 85%. That doesn't mean they're on it every day, but 85% of teens, when you look at their phones, have a YouTube or they're on it or they've looked at it for something. Probably adults too. Number 2, Instagram, not too far behind. Snapchat is coming up quickly, and I'll show you another statistic about it in just a second. Number 4, remember that? Facebook, and Twitter, just a few people still, teenagers. So Facebook has been decreasing, obviously, for the last several years in the 13 to 18 group, whereas Snapchat's been skyrocketing. And so 3 years ago, if I showed this, Snapchat's in 5th place, now it's in 3rd, who knows, next year it could be different. Now here's the different thing. If I switch this question around and say, which one are they on the most? It looks like this, okay? So those of you that are saying Snapchat number 1, you're right. They are on it the most, right? And it's an interesting phenomenon that's kind of happened in certain ways. So I have girls that are all 10 and under. However, I also have a niece who just graduated high school a couple years ago. And she has been kind of my, I could say, experiment when it comes to social media. She's helped me with a lot of the things and helped me understand some of this. In fact, here's a picture, of course, taking a selfie with, because that's what teenagers do. She took a selfie with me and she was like, yeah, I'm going to tell you about Snapchat. And she started talking to me about what it was. This is in 2015, right when it was coming out. She's like, yeah, I send these pictures and they get deleted and it's great and it's awesome and no one ever sees. And I'm like, oh, really? Let me investigate a little bit. I found a way within about 2 minutes to hack Snapchat. And I told her, I go, Jordan, come over here for a minute. She's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm hacking Snapchat. She's like, what do you mean? I was like, just give me a second. I said, I can download, at that time, all 4.6 million users' photos that they've ever posted on Snapchat. And her face turned white. And I said, Jordan, why is your face turning white? What's the matter? By the way, I've said the same thing to a bunch of 9th graders in our district, and they all went, oh my God. I said, how do you think things are sent? I mean, in her mind, she thought you take this silly dog face selfie and it's magically sent through the air, right, to this phone. Well, in actuality, right, take that selfie, goes up to the cloud, the internet, Snapchat servers, comes back down onto that friend's phone, and then sure, deleted. But what'd you notice? There's always a copy somewhere. The internet never forgets. And so I've showed her this, and again, she's like, well, I'll go ahead and admit, this friend of mine sent me this picture, and I was like, okay, I'm just letting you know. A friend. Let's just say a friend sent, yes, everything, Jordan, it happens, right? And so I don't tell her this to scare her, but just to give her some knowledge and say, just know that when even though it's digital and it seems quick, there's still a record of everything. There's no such thing as truly anonymous. There's no such thing as truly temporary on the internet. There's always a way to track something. And so I said, so in 10 years from now, when you're out there in the workforce, you want to make sure that if something does turn up, that it's not going to be something that's going to be kind of damaging to you for your life. And it's hard. By the way, this also affects not just teenagers. There's a lot of 20-somethings, 30-somethings that have made some big mistakes recently because we're all kind of experiencing this at the same time, right? It's not just the teenagers that are learning about it. So really helping her kind of figure that out. Now, here's an interesting stat too. This survey was done, I think same thing, May of 2018. And this was, what kind of effect does social media have on kids' lives? It's kind of not what you would think. It's kind of a wide range, actually. 31% said interactions on social media make them happy. 24% said, not happy. 45%, good and bad. And I think probably as an adult, you could probably say the same thing, right? Like, yeah, there's times where I like seeing certain things on Facebook. There's times when that relative likes to rant about that one political thing, right? And then you're like, oh, here we go again. It doesn't matter which side you're on. And it just ends up being a very impersonal space. So there's good and bad to everything. And this will be a theme throughout, by the way, because not all social media is terrible. In fact, if you could list, what are some ideas, what are some things you think would be positive about social media? What are some things that you like about it or positive to have? Give me a couple.
Sharing pictures of your kids really fast.
Sharing pictures of your kids really quick. I call that sharenting. Only if you overdo it. Yes?
Just working information. You personally could be family. I've got a niece that, I swear to God, there's not going to be anything nobody doesn't know about how she grew up.
Right.
Her photos are on there.
It's captured.
Stories are on there constantly.
I do a video every year of my kids. I take all my favorite photos and videos and every year, and I set it to whatever the popular music was of that year and post it on YouTube. So for the last 6 years, my kids have been embarrassed by their, right now they're still 10, but when they become teenagers, like, Dad, don't show that photo, right? I have that captured as a memory for me, and I've actually kept it private off of YouTube, but it's still, YouTube has it. So again, not ever completely private, but I want to be able to see them kind of grow throughout the years. And it's weird is, they remember things now. Like my daughter, who was 18 months at the time, she goes, I remember that time you put me in your backpack and tried to sneak me into Disneyland. And I was like, that was just a photo and it was a joke, and you were 18 months old. There's no way you could remember that. But she doesn't. She remembers the photo. Yeah, photos have definitely proliferated now, right? We've got a digital memory that's starting to happen on top of our physical memory, which is interesting. There are some positives, right? That ability to stay connected. And this one's kind of, the middle one there is in between. It does boost self-esteem for some. There's that quiet kid who can't speak up, who now has a platform to speak up. Now there's the other side of this too, right? There's also negatives. Cyberbullying, the idea that when you see your self-esteem gets hurt because you don't have a lot of likes on your image. You've seen girls at the mall sometimes, they'll take 17 photos of themselves up like this to get the perfect one. There's that pressure to feel like they need to get a lot of likes and a lot of favorites. There's a little bit of oversharing, the distraction, and then of course that face-to-face part. How does that work out? By the way, not just kids, I would say adults too, we need to continue to work on that, right? If there's a real problem, ranting about it in a comment thread is not the way to go, or even text. Let's pick up the phone and talk. I feel like that solves problems a lot quicker. It's harder, somewhat, now, right? But it's definitely a skill that we want to continue to use. So these are some quick parenting tips that I've shared with my community, and this, again, take it with you will. Every parent is different. Some of you don't worry about teenagers. The big thing is I always say, this is, by the way, parenting skill number one. This doesn't do anything with technology. Ask questions. If something strange is happening, ask questions. It may not be something online. It may just be they're having a problem or a conflict with a friend. I always suggest to set the limits to the amount of social media apps they have. They don't need 16 different social media apps. Start out with something, like if your kid wants to get on Instagram or Snapchat, say, okay, listen, that's your one. Let me see how you do. 6 months, a year, looking good, responsibility, maybe you can add another one. I had a lot of parents do that, scale it up as they earn the responsibility, and they'll get smarter and wiser. Kids these days are starting to learn more about this too, so they're not quite as doing some of the silly mistakes we made early on. I think the open communication is important. The worst thing you can do sometimes as a parent when a kid says, oh, this just someone just sent me this picture, is to go, give me that phone, take it away. You don't get to look at it anymore. Now, next time something happens with your kid, are they gonna come tell you? Well, if you took the phone away from them, they're gonna say, well, I don't wanna tell my mom or dad this because they may take the phone away, right? So you gotta be able to have some sort of dialogue. Don't get me wrong, there are times you take the phone away, but you wanna make sure you're having that dialogue with them too, because that's important. You don't want that to ever go away. Look for behavioral changes. This is the same thing with bullying in school. My daughter, who's, again, no social media, but she's dealing with this right now in her classroom, where there's a couple boys that are picking on her, and I could tell she's like, oh, I just don't want to go to school today, Dad. You know, and it's like, oh, why? You love school. She's like, yeah, not right now. And I got out of her that something was happening. A couple boys were picking on her. Check those privacy settings, making sure the world can't see everything you're posting. And I always tell the kids this, they were like, I want my privacy. And I was like, well, you don't really have privacy on social media. I mean, privacy from your parents happens, in your bedroom you can have privacy, when you go to the bathroom you can have privacy. If you're on the internet, there really isn't a lot of privacy. So making sure they know that you're giving them some autonomy there when you add those social media apps, but know that that also increases responsibility, right? There's a Spider-Man quote there somewhere, right? With great responsibility comes, and I already messed it up. See, that was good. Right, with great power comes great responsibility. And then I always like the idea of making some sort of social media agreement. Not just you telling them, but you working together. Like, what are some things, if this happens, what are we gonna do? Like, talk about some scenarios. Like, what have you noticed that has happened, or what have your friends talked about? What's gonna happen when you encounter that? Let's make a little agreement, and even just write it down. type it out, and then have your child sign it with you. I think that's pretty powerful. Because that's like, we both agreed to this, right? And they signed it, and it's not just you telling them what they have to do. So they take some ownership in it. And I'll show you another example of a family kind of media use agreement at the end here. So social media, of course, was born mostly because of the mobility that we now have because of our cell phones, which leads to this next item, screen time.